You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we are watching right now this explosive battle between Trump's White House and his DOJ and FBI agents who have now filed suit in two separate lawsuits against Trump and his Department of Justice. We now have some good news on the horizon here insofar as we can take some good news out of this. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, so Brian, these two lawsuits, two class action suits that were brought by two separate groups of FBI agents and employees who believe they're about to be unlawfully terminated, fired from their jobs for simply investigating the J6 cases or the classified documents Mar-a-Lago case. They have now been assigned to federal district court trial judges in Washington, D.C. I will tell you, prosecutors and defense attorneys are always keenly interested in what judges will be assigned the cases that they are bringing, that they are litigating, because the judge can make all the difference. And the good news is both of the judges who will preside over these class action lawsuits are pretty darn good judges. One is Gia Cobb. She is a former public defender. In fact, Brian, she is a product of the same public defender service office as Tanya Chutkan is. Those were the public defenders against whom we, the prosecutors in Washington, D.C., would try cases. So I had cases with Tanya Chutkan. I also had a couple of cases with Gia Cobb, probably more with Judge Chutkan than Judge Cobb, but I can tell you she is a product of a great public defender service office and practice, and she has distinguished herself as a really good judge in the time she has been on the federal bench in Washington, D.C. She's fair. I believe she is a Biden appointee, and I believe she will handle this suit brought by the FBI against the Department of Justice, against the acting Attorney General. She will handle it well and fairly. The other case has been assigned to Judge Tim Kelly. Now, Judge Tim Kelly was actually a federal prosecutor in my former office for a decade and was pretty highly regarded. He wasn't so much in our violent crime practice. He was in the public corruption practice. But most importantly, Brian, he presided over the Proud Boys trial. So I got to watch him preside. He did a heck of a good job. And importantly, when there were attacks on the government and on the FBI's work, he was generally ruling in favor of the FBI, of the prosecution, of the Department of Justice. So it feels like he already knows a couple of things about all January 6 matters. One, that the FBI and the federal prosecutors were doing a good, honest, honorable job. And two, Tim Kelly saw up close, as the presiding judge in the Proud Boys case, the Proud Boys prosecution, the horrors that were perpetrated at the Capitol on January 6th. So I fully expect Tim Kelly to be a really strong, fair, independent, and impartial judge in presiding over one of these FBI class actions that has now been filed. Here's the thing. People will say, well, wait a minute, wasn't Tim Kelly appointed by Donald Trump? And the answer is yes, he was. I think I can explain how that came about. I have to draw some reasonable inferences. But after Tim Kelly left federal prosecution, he went over and worked with Senator Grassley's office for a couple of years as a national security attorney on Grassley's staff. Now, just 1 year into Donald Trump's term, in 2017, undoubtedly Senator Grassley said to Donald Trump, this is where I'm drawing the reasonable inference, I got this guy on my staff who'd like to be a federal judge, and Donald Trump appointed Tim Kelly off of Grassley's staff as a federal judge. I don't think I would call him a Trump judge the way we look at an Aileen Cannon or perhaps a few others who have distinguished themselves as not capable of being fair and impartial. Tim Kelly is capable and has proven that he is a fair, impartial, and independent judge, though he was appointed by Donald Trump. So this is good news that these two FBI lawsuits to try to stop Donald Trump's lawless terminations of FBI agents have landed with these two judges.
Glenn, is this the kind of thing where, okay, now this litigation is in process. Are we going to see these people be able to retain their jobs, or is this just litigating against the prospect of, okay, they've been unlawfully terminated, now they're owed back pay, for example? Because I think the goal for you and I, as we've spoken about in previous videos, is to make sure that people retain their positions within the FBI so that they're not just replaced by Trump loyalists.
The good news, Brian, is there are a number of steps that have been taken by Donald Trump's henchmen at the Department of Justice. And let me tell you, the people like the acting attorney general and like this guy, Emil Bove, who is doing Donald Trump's nefarious bidding, these people will go down in infamy for what they're doing right now. And they are taking incremental steps trying to wrongfully terminate the FBI agents and employees. Here's the good news. They're not there yet. So given that these suits have been filed, given that they're seeking injunctive relief, translation, they want the judges to tell the Department of Justice and Donald Trump's administration, stop right now before you make your way to unlawful terminations of these agents for having the temerity to investigate and expose the crimes of Donald Trump. That is not good cause to terminate someone. And I think there is some hope that the judges can cut the damage off at the pass before these FBI agents and employees, have to suffer through a wrongful termination and a potentially years-long court battle to get their good name restored and get whatever back pay they might be owed if they are wrongfully terminated.
To that point, Glenn, I'm going to put a tweet up here on the screen from Ken Delanian from NBC. A person directly familiar with the matter tells NBC that the FBI has turned over to the Justice Department, as ordered, a list of thousands of agents and other personnel involved in January 6 cases, but the person says the list does not include names. The agents were identified by a number. It's called their unique employee identifier. The person said that this was done in the name of employee safety. The Justice Department, of course, can match the numbers with names on the payroll, but by leaving the names off, the FBI ensures that for now, there's not a master list floating around of the names of people who worked on January 6th. So clearly, not putting these people's names on a list right now at least protects these people's identities from these extrajudicial, Trump-aligned folks in the media who would love nothing more than to just make these people the targets of everybody's ire and basically to ruin their lives. So it protects them at least for the time being. But Glenn, you and I both know that these people's identities won't be able to be protected for long from the DOJ. And if Pam Bondi at the DOJ wants to get these people fired, just having some small process step, which is just converting, their unique employee identifier with their actual name so that they can be fired, is just a small obstacle for them to overcome. So, do you have any reaction to the fact that as ordered, the FBI did turn over the names of these agents who prosecuted January 6 cases to the DOJ?
My reaction, Brian, is one of disappointment. I wish the FBI leadership had just said, listen, we're going to take a beat. We're going to see what happens with these two lawsuits that were just filed, seeking, among other things, a court order that the White House and the Department of Justice henchmen should not get the lists of FBI agents, whether by name or number. And the number is going to be pretty easy to decipher. Like you say, it will give them some minimal protection, but not a whole heck of a lot. Now, in fairness, I don't know the timing of Ken Delanian's reporting about precisely when the lists were given over by FBI acting leadership to the Department of Justice, and obviously it'll go right to the White House, versus when the lawsuits were filed. We know they were filed today, seeking a court order putting a stop to those lists being turned over. So I don't know the timing of it. It may be that the lists went over first and then the lawsuits were filed. But I wish FBI leadership would have taken a beat and said, listen, we're still putting them together. But once those lawsuits were filed, I think that should have just frozen everything, maintained the status quo while the judges had a day to rule on that request for injunctive relief. But here is the trick bag that the FBI leadership was in. If they disobeyed what was a lawful directive from the DOJ leadership, corrupt and doing Donald Trump's bidding though they may be, then they could have perhaps been terminated not for being involved in investigations of Donald Trump, but for not complying with lawful directives, in essence, being derelict in their duties. So I think everybody is trying to navigate these treacherous waters as best they can, but I am a little disappointed. I do wish the FBI leadership would have held a little bit stronger and held off giving those lists to DOJ and the White House.
And finally, Glenn, let's finish off with this. And this is less a technical question and more of just a vibes question here. But in light of Trump basically waging war on people for the crime of doing their jobs. And by the way, a job that ended up bearing itself out as being legitimate by virtue of the fact that, these prosecutions got grand juries, for example, to find enough cause to indict, and there was obviously enough of a basis to move forward with these investigations as well. And let's be honest, both of them would have secured convictions had the Supreme Court not meddled and had Judge Cannon not meddled. And so what is going to be the relationship between the DOJ and the FBI, given how this thing set off, given that Donald Trump, his first act in office was to basically slash half of the workforce of the FBI right off the bat?
Hard to predict. I think right now the open question is, what will Attorney General Pam Bondi do when she arrives? Will she insist that people in leadership positions at the Department of Justice act like flippin' adults, act honestly, ethically, in accordance with the rule of law and the Constitution? Or will she buy into Donald Trump's revenge and retaliation campaign and basically fall in line with the rest of the lapdogs that are presently in place, in some of the leadership positions at the Department of Justice? But Brian, the other thing that you put your finger on is, you said the FBI agents are being hounded and retaliated against and potentially wrongfully fired for simply doing their job. Let me just tweak what's going on here a little bit. Let's assume that there was some person who was massively embezzling money, and the FBI investigated it and prosecuted it, and it turned out that the embezzler was a big Trump donor, and Donald Trump did not want his friend, the embezzler, prosecuted. So what he did was punish the FBI agents who investigated, who pursued the embezzler for violating our nation's laws. That is a variation on the theme of what is going on here. When these FBI agents were assigned by their supervisors the job, the responsibility of investigating the J6 crimes that, come on now, we all saw with our own eyes. Of course, those were crimes. And then after they had been assigned those cases, and an FBI agent cannot reject an assignment, or that could be a terminable offense, after they did what they had to do, they're going to be punished by Donald Trump because, he was displeased because it made him look bad or directly exposed his own criminal activity. This is beyond unconscionable. It is a gross abuse of power by Trump and company.
Well, Glenn, obviously this fight is not going to tamp down anytime soon, so I know that you and I are going to stay on top of this. As soon as we have any updates, we'll bring them to you. For those who are watching, if you want to stay on top of everything as it breaks, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.